Books, books, books. That's what we've got for you today. Specifically, book recommendations on how to decode conflict. We've got 3 of those. We've got another book to help you be more calm and wise. Who doesn't want that, right? One that's inspiring, plus a fun read, plus fun stuff to watch on Netflix. Let's do it.
Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learnt from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hi, it's Zoe, and it's good to be back in your ears again. I am your friendly neighborhood leadership expert from Canada/Australia. That's right, I'm a slashy. And this is episode 218 of the podcast as we record it on June 22nd. So happy post-equinox day. The days are either getting longer or shorter wherever you are. Where we are, the days are just cold and dark. But you know what? It's Australia, so it's all pretty darn good. So a couple of personal updates from me to kick us off. I am about halfway through writing the novel. I couldn't believe it either, but I finally compiled all the bits and pieces and added up the words, and it's sitting at 40,000 words. And a typical novel can be anywhere between 70 to 120,000. 120,000 is pretty darn long, though. So I expect to get the manuscript finished by the end of July. Or more that the editor hopes I will get the manuscript done by the end of July for the first round of edits. And that's my other bit of news, is that I have secured an editor. Yay! An experienced editor who specializes in science fiction. I'm so happy about this. It's really hard to write in the dark without a sounding board. So I'm super pumped that he's come on board, and he's currently got my outline and going over that with a fine tooth comb. So I'm madly scribbling in the background, and he's taken a look with the red pencil at what I've put together for the novel. I think we're going to call it World Builders. I wish that was easier to say with a Canadian accent. It probably sounds better in Australian, like World Builders. And that was my worst Australian accent ever. If you could say World Builders with an Australian accent, get back to me. That would be awesome. Oh, also a shout out and a big thank you to Peter, who sent me a message through LinkedIn explaining his dedication to the podcast. So much so that he has listened to some episodes 3 times, specifically the episode with Liz Wiseman. He loved that one. I love that one too. So that's awesome. But 3 times? Oh my goodness, you're amazing. Peter also sent me some pictures of where he tunes in on his bike commute to work, in what looks like the car in rain, and his shower. Luckily, not a picture of him in the shower, just his shower. Random. Not sure how I feel about appearing in people's showers, but there you go. It's on your end, and fabulous. So if you have a fabulous place, maybe not in the shower, that you would love to send me where you're listening to this podcast, that would be fantastic. I'd love to hear from listeners. It's always a big thrill for me because, you know what, putting this together, especially a solo-sode like this one, is pretty dry sometimes. Like, honestly, I'm staring at my computer and the muffling of my podcast bunker, which is like this foam stuff, and I'm sitting on a Swiss ball. Whoever invented Swiss balls and thought they were comfortable, they are not comfortable. I think on my wish list for my birthday this year, I want one of those little saddle chairs that the dentists use. I think that would probably be an upgrade to the podcast bunker. In any case, thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing, Peter. I'm so delighted that you're listening and you're getting such value from the podcast. It made my day. Okay. Now, as I promised, this is a solo-sode all focused on books. Now, I've come to discover not everybody reads as much as I do with as much enthusiasm as I do. And if I listed every single book that I've read, your eyes would quickly gloss over. So I've decided to cherry pick the best ones. And the books that make it onto my recommendation list have to qualify in 2 ways. One, that I remember some key point about it. If I don't remember the key points, then obviously it didn't have an impact. And the second part that for it to make it onto the list, will I actually refer to it again? Will I keep it on my shelf, my virtual shelf or my physical shelf, and open it up again in the future to use in my work with my own life or with my clients. So these books have passed muster on this. The theme, I guess, is decoding conflict. One of the themes that we're talking about in Amplifiers this quarter is leading in complexity. And there's nothing more complex than people dynamics. And difficult conversations is a bread and butter workshop that I run, masterclass that I run with my clients. And in that masterclass, I give my students a number of different maps or ways of looking at the issues. And the idea is to try and unpack, make sense of the complex interdynamics of human relationships. And there's lots of potential drivers, and People Stuff, my latest book, unpacks a few of those as well. So I was super excited to discover new books that gave me new perspectives to add richness and depth to the conversations around conversations. So without further ado, drum roll, let's talk about them. The first one, now I got to flip my notes here. So apologies for the paper stuff, but that's the way it is in the podcast bunker. I can't remember everything from off the top of my head. Okay, the first book, here we go. Let's try the drum roll again. Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And the subtitle is Breaking Through the Invisible Boundaries of Global Business. Now, I have to say, my colleague Colin Ellis did a Goodreads review of this book, and he didn't like it so much. He thought the frameworks were good, but all the stories reduced the dynamics to sample size of one, meaning he thought that it reduced the generalizations to just that, generalizations. I disagree. I think this book did a fabulous job of outlining the tensions or the poles or spectrums of different priorities that cultures have, like people from different nations have, when it comes to key elements of working. And it was fascinating for me. And it explained a lot of different interactions I've had with different cultures over the time, and what, when somebody does or says something that you just shocks you because it's so jarring, because it goes against your own culture code, the embedded truths or ways of being that you don't even know exist until you have them showcased differently by someone else who's got different protocols. So this book actually puts a map over these different protocols and helps us to understand the tensions that arise when we have people from different cultures working together, which quite often we do. Like, we're such a hodgepodge mix of wherever we are in the world. It's important that we get where people are coming from. I wanted to highlight the 8 scales that she has when she talks about the different elements of work. And you can go onto her website, erinmeyer.com, so ERINMEYER. And if you want, you can pay for access to her scales, where you can pump in different countries and see how they profile against each of these 8 scales. Fabulous business model. So all the scales are outlined in her book, and she gives some examples. But if you want to compare, let's say, Australia and Canada, then you can go and get 24-hour access, and there you go. You showcase it all. Without further ado, though, to give you a little taster, these are the 8 scales that she talks about. Low context versus high context. This is actually a very powerful idea. And what this means is that some cultures are so long and well established that ways of being are embedded in so many of their different practices that there's already a shorthand, so that you don't have to spell things out directly in your verbal communications. There's a lot more subtle cues. And I first came across this whole concept, and I think it was Erin Meyer's book that was introduced to me by this Arundel lady in Alice Springs, who was giving one of my leadership groups a cultural context conversation. She talked about her discovery of low context versus high context. And she said in her culture, her Arundel land culture, that it's, and for many Aboriginal cultures in Australia, it's very high context. I mean, these are living cultures that have existed for some 60,000 years. So you think they've got some norms that are embedded in their cultural practices. They do. And so in which case, you don't often look directly at people. You have very subtle interactions, little cues that mean something. Whereas somebody from Canada, and Canada is, aside from its Indigenous population, is a really young country in comparison. So even the Indigenous cultures of Canada, I do not think go back as far as the Aboriginal cultures in Australia. So relatively young in comparison. And so they have a low context culture, which means that Canadians tend to be a lot more direct than Aboriginal Australians. So would look people directly in the eye, ask for answers, ask very strong questions. And this can be quite affronting if you are somebody who is from an Indigenous culture in Australia. Likewise, the Canadians just don't understand why the Aboriginal people might be what appear to be evasive. So it's a cultural misunderstanding based on this one dimension of low context versus high context. Fascinating. I love this chapter. All right, that's just one of the scales. So here are the other ones. How cultures like to give direct negative feedback. So some like direct negative feedback and some like indirect negative feedback. It turns out that Canadians like to soften the blow a little, and Australians too. So you kind of like to butter people up a little bit before you give them the news about how they can fix things. And other cultures are just far more just say it how it is, like the Dutch. So you can see how this can be difficult if you're somebody who's Dutch. It just lays it all on the line versus somebody who likes to have things softened up a little bit. This actually happened to me working with a group of participants from the Dutch embassy here in Australia. They came out, well, this is when I was working at Outward Bound. They came out to do a session, and I was teaching DISC, which is the behavior preference tool that I often use with groups. And one of the participants piped up and said, "I do not like that word. I do not like the use of that word. I don't think it's appropriate." And for me as a facilitator, as a Canadian facilitator, I was quite shocked by the direct expression of critique that this person had. But it was completely normal, au fait, and fine, given where they come from. Conversely, when I was doing some work with Singaporeans on an outdoor experiential program, I remember briefing the group on their behaviors and giving them some insights as to what I thought they were doing well and not so well. And the participant representative, so their equivalent of their staff, came up to me and said, "Oh, that was a bit brutal." They didn't use that word. I interpreted it. They're like, "That was a little bit too direct. They've been a bit affronted by your feedback." And I was like, "Wow." I was being just very constructive and certainly not as direct as the Dutch. But there you have it. So those are some examples of how cultures like to give and receive negative feedback or constructive feedback. Another scale is principles first versus application first. What does this mean? It means when you're selling an idea, do you sell all the background rationale behind it, or do you just cut to the chase and give how this is going to make a difference? In American cultures, it's all about application first. Get to the bottom line. Tell me what this means, what we can do with it. And in other cultures, I can't remember the one that they explained. First of all, it was like, no, we need to go through the 500 pages of research to explain what we get to in terms of the conclusion. So you can understand, like if you're coming from a principles first and versus an application first culture, you can be quite frustrated by somebody who just dumps a solution on the table without having it vigorously assessed. Okay, number 4, egalitarian versus hierarchical. I think we can kind of get that one, right? So some cultures are very hierarchical and some are more egalitarian when it comes to business, and this can cause ripe misinterpretations of behavior. We've got consensual versus top-down, related to egalitarian versus hierarchical, but not always. And number 6, I think it is task-based versus relationship-based. I love this one because that's a pole that appears, or polarity, I should say, that appears in the DISC model, again, that I teach, which is understanding human behavior. So it shows up in business preferences as well. Another one for disagreeing is the culture confrontational or avoids confrontation? It's not just personal preferences. Apparently, there's cultures that go across this too. And the last one, which I also find super fascinating, is linear time versus flexible time. Linear time is when you see time or experience time as a line. There's a starting point and an end point. Now, for post-industrial cultures, it's very much a linear concept of time because if you think about it, from an assembly line, you needed to have things stacked in order, otherwise the whole thing would fall apart. In more agrarian, nature-based cultures, it was less linear because for example, if you are making a living and the basis of your economy is all agriculture, then planting seeds at 7 a.m. versus 7:30 is not such a big difference. Like it depends on what's happening with the rest of the seasons in context. Is it happening today or tomorrow? Doesn't really matter. It's more about, okay, what's the optimal time to plant things given the conditions of the sun, the earth, the rain that we've had. And so the precision-based approach to time can vary based on the general context of where people find themselves. Fabulously interesting, right? And that could be cause for huge amounts of misunderstandings and disagreements. And the author gave this example of how this shows up in real time, where let's say the German contingency of the organization wanted to set meetings 6 months in advance on a particular Tuesday at such and such a time. And their Nigerian counterparts were like, I can't commit to that because so much can be changed and in flux from that. We have a different political system that can declare a public holiday based on the weather and the states of the moon and phases of the moon, which can be unpredictable. We may not know until the day before, that kind of stuff. So how can you commit to having a meeting when there's so much at flux? So fascinating. Okay, so that's the gist of the book, Culture Map, Breaking Through the Invisible Boundaries of Global Business by Erin Meyer. Definitely on the bookshelf to be referred to and used again. So yeah, that's recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 2, and this book was the most innovative I've seen when it comes to intractable, difficult conversations. And it is called, here's a drum roll, brrr, ding. Was that a better drum roll? It probably was. This one's called Why Are We Yelling? The Art of Productive Disagreement by Buster Benson. Now, I love this book also because of the author's name, Buster Benson. I mean, yeah, it's a cool name. Aside from the cool name, the content is fantastic. It really is groundbreaking in its finesse of looking at intractable divisions, like, let's say, politics in America. I don't know why it's so divisive. It could be politics in Australia or politics in Canada. Anywhere where you have polarized opinions, this book is the go-to guide for that. One of the key takeaways for me from this book, it's about, first of all, being aware of your internal voices. And the key to dealing with difficult issues is being aware of yourself. When are your buttons getting pushed? What pushes those buttons? And which voices are coming to the fore? When do you experience discomfort? What's triggering that? So that you don't default to defensive aggressive, which catalyzes difficult conversations that go nowhere. The idea of having a disagreement that's productive is the powerful tool here. It means that you can have disagreements on positions and have a productive conversation around it. Productive in that both parties learn, both parties add to the conversation, and both parties are enriched through the conversation. You may or may not change your position on a policy, say, for example, and yet you come away with more connection with the other human, more understanding of self and the other, and a greater depth of knowledge about the issues. So this is what this book brings to the table. And I wanted to showcase a list of questions that Buster Benson puts forward in his book. Before I do that though, one of the other key principles is to being curious, is one of the most important aspects of being able to have productive disagreements. Being curious about how it is that you came to develop your own position, and how is it that the other person or people came to develop their position on a policy. Okay, so where is it? All right, here we go. Sorry, I had to cut away there for a second. I lost my place in my iPad. Okay, so this is what Buster has to say. If you're stuck in an argument with someone and are frustrated and confused and have no idea how any of this will ever get resolved, it's possible that what you need is a better question. Here are a few questions that you can bring to almost any disagreement. What formative events in your life brought you to this belief? What's really at stake here? What's complicated about your position here that people don't usually notice at first? If what you believe has proven conclusively true to its staunchest opponents, what would happen? What would have to be true for you to change your mind about this? Isn't that powerful? What other possibilities might we be missing that would change how we each thought about this? Imagine a world where this is no longer a problem. How did we get there? Wow. So I think if you have these questions in your toolkit to pull out when you get into an intractable conversation, that's really fantastic. That will help break through understandings and explore about how did we get to this place where you believe in gun control and I don't, or you believe in access to abortion and I don't, or whatever the polarization is, And even with those two sensitive topics, you can feel immediately people leap to their emotional response. And Buster's point about that is like, oh, did you just have an uncomfortable button being pressed? Okay, obviously this is really meaningful to you. What is the internal voice that's being activated with that? Let's explore that. Let's dig into that. Let's make sure that we lean into a productive disagreement as opposed to one that just wants to change people's minds. By the way, don't ever go into a disagreement expecting to change someone's mind. Go into it expecting to discover someone else's mind and learn more about yourself too. All right, so that was Buster Benson and his book, Why Are We Yelling? The Art of Productive Disagreement. Yep, on the shelf, will be used again. The third recommendation is the book that we are using in Amplifiers this quarter, and it's called Navigating Polarities, Using Both and Thinking to Lead Transformation by Brian Emerson and Kelly Lewis. By the way, all these books will be listed in the show notes and hyperlinked to their respective author pages. So what I love polarities. I mean, being able to think in polarities is an advanced leadership thinking technique. It's one of the reasons why we are exploring this more deeply in our amplifier session. And here's an example of a polarity. They look like opposites, but are actually interdependent, and the whole is better for both of them being in play. For example, here's one straight out of DISC again, which is team versus task. In any work that we do at work, we need to focus both on team and task. It's not one or the other. And so what polarity thinking does looks at the benefits of each of the poles, as well as what happens if we have too much of a good thing. So if we do too much team stuff, what are some possible negative unintended consequences? Likewise, if we do much task stuff, what are some possible unintended negative consequences? So that's understanding the play of balance between the two. And then we explore, where's our natural gravity? Where do we sit naturally? Which pole do we tend to want to sit in more of, and therefore often look at the negatives of the opposite pole instead of looking at the positives? So we orient ourselves into our preferences. And in this particular book, the authors talk about finding the third way and asking the questions of, what does the and look like? What does it look like if we do team and task? What does that sound like, feel like? And it could be, here's one off the cuff, productive teamwork. That's as banal as it can be. So that was the positive third way, potentially. It's about teamwork, but it's also about being productive, producing something. They also get us to dig into what are the negative resistance to that. What's at stake? What are the vulnerabilities that can exist? Like, what would have us push against the and version of that? And it could be, if in this example, the team versus task piece, or team and task piece, the vulnerability might be, are we standing strong enough in our intention? Are we clear enough on what we're trying to achieve? Will we be actually too compromising if we do productive teamwork? Will we lose some of the individual initiative? So those are some of the vulnerabilities that might exist around that. And then the last piece of the book is saying, okay, what are your strategies? So what are some tactical, strategical things that we can do to try and integrate the third way? Beautiful, easy, simple book, and it's got a long list of common polarities at work, in leadership, and in personal world. Easy read and a really useful tool. So a conversation I was having with a leader today was around one of the polarities that exists in businesses, structure versus flexibility. And it was under the subtopic of what happens when your staff don't want to go back into the office after working from home for a year and a half. Apparently, it's a big problem. So a lot of employers are like, right, everyone back to the office. And the staff are going, nah, don't want to do that, thanks. And there's this tug of war about what's appropriate. And a lot of the employees are saying, you guys aren't as productive or accountable. And the employees are going, I can get way more done and I'm much happier if I'm working from home. And so everybody's sort of camping out at opposite ends. I think this is a polarity to be managed, not a problem to be resolved. And so what not to do is trying to treat it as a problem, meaning that there's one solution to fixing this. It's an either or issue. It's both, right? And that's why there's such huge dialogue out there in the workplaces and in social media about the hybrid workplace. A lot of organizations are going, yeah, it's got to be a both thing. Some employers are pushing back against that, saying, no, we've got to go back to the old way. There's only benefits of having everybody be around. I need to have everybody here. We can build better teams. Don't know. I think, again, opportunity to do polarity management around that and find a third way through this. All right. So those are my 3 books on decoding conflict, which I think would be fabulous assets to your personal library. They are certainly fabulous assets to mine. An inspiring book. Oh, yeah, I'll talk about that one now. You may have read it already. It's Legacy by James Kerr, and it's the story of the All Blacks, the rugby team over in New Zealand. This is a beautiful poetic book, actually. I was surprised at how lovely it was to read this book and inspiring. This is about a sporting team and their commitment to each other and to the profession of football and how they back each other and how they subscribe to a code that means everything to them. And they have such a strong culture in that football team. I always hesitate about recommending sports examples to then apply to business examples because the contexts are so incredibly different. A sporting team, there are set rules, it's contained time frame, it's got a lot more boundaries to it and less dynamic elements to it than regular business. Having said that, on the field, there's plenty of like the metaphors is clearly there. So there are things that we can take from this book without assuming that we can do exactly the same thing in our own businesses. Creating your own manifesto, for example, is one of the things that's most useful out of this book. But it is a lovely read, and so I recommend it as kind of like if the first 3 books I recommended were main courses to dig your teeth into and really savor and get nourishment from, then this book is kind of like dessert from a leadership framework point of view. So that's Legacy by James Kerr. Now, the book to help you be more calm and wise is Joyful Wisdom by Yongyi Mingyar. And this was recommended by my mentor, who is going on a deep meditation, self-awareness practice, deep dive exploration, I guess. And it's a wonderful book. It's about meditation. It's also about Buddhist principles without being, dunk your head into Buddhism kind of thing. It really is about developing awareness in all senses of the word. And what I got from this book was to vary the way that I find stillness and to change up my meditation practice and to keep developing the ability to see and experience. So this, again, was a beautiful book. Joyful Wisdom by Yongyi Mingyar. I hopefully didn't pronounce that too badly. Okay, what else? I've got fun stuff. The fun read. The fun read. Yeah, I don't just read business books. I read fun stuff too. And my favorite fun read so far, or lately I should say, is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Andy Weir wrote The Martian, which was made into that blockbuster starring Matt Damon of the same name. I love that movie, love that book. He's incredibly funny. His second book, Artemis, wasn't as good. I think Project Hail Mary is getting better, getting back closer to what The Martian was in terms of character pacing and wit. So I thoroughly enjoyed. It was a fun romp, a fun science fiction romp. So the premise is that there's something that's consuming the sun. There's a race against time to solve the problem, or the Earth will go cold. And the world comes together to try and find resources to figure it all out. And the main character, Dr. Grace, Ryland Grace, gets sent off into space with two other colleagues to work it out. Stuff ensues. Chaos happens. Things need to be problem solved. There's first contact of an alien race. Yeah, it's cool. So if you like that sort of thing, I'd highly recommend it. Now, on to Netflix. Now, Netflix is not just a place where you zone out. I believe that storytelling in all its forms is a useful thing for us to help learn about ourselves and humans and the planet. So I started exploring a whole bunch of different stuff on Netflix. Don't know how I ended up here, but I watched, first of all, the American Crime Story on the O.J. Simpson trial. And I remember the O.J. Simpson trial. It was back in 96, 97. It was all-consuming. It was on the TV every day for what felt like forever, but it was about 9 months or so, a year maybe, and the fallout of that. And so to have this story be told again was fascinating to look at as an older adult looking back on that time. So I went on and read 2 books afterwards. I read Marcia Clark, who is the main prosecutor in the case, and her book, Without a Doubt, and her perspective on what happened in that case and the way that O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, I should say. The jury found him not guilty. And then I read O.J. Simpson's account, which was an interesting thing in itself, that why would he write a book like that, allegedly to shore up finances to leave to his kids. He never got to make money off the book because one of the victims in that murder actually got rights. His families got rights to the book. So the book was called If I Did It by O.J. Simpson. What can I say about this story? Didn't leave me with a great impression of O.J. Simpson, let's put it that way. Just the insight into somebody who is so narcissistic and so self-obsessed. It was fascinating to see how an individual can describe events and to layer meaning on top of it that paints himself as a victim and at the hands of a manipulative, out of control wife. So, spoiler, does he do it? The evidence is completely overwhelming. And in the book that O.J. Simpson writes himself, he describes a scene where he pretty much does it. This one is sitting with me because I'm not sure what to make of it from a humanity point of view and from a justice system point of view. It's sort of rolling around in my brain going, what does this mean? And part of the conversation is coming out of my new novel, I think, in some of the themes that I'm exploring there. So yeah, exploring that. Love to hear if you've watched the American Crime Story series on O.J. Simpson. And then I followed on with 2 other series that were just as disturbing for different reasons. The next was the Jeffrey Epstein story, Filthy Rich, the story of a child sex abuser and trafficker, but he never got to go to court because he killed himself when he was arrested for the second time on these particular charges. Yeah. Really challenging to think about. How does someone develop into someone who abuses children in such a way? How does that happen? How do people become complicit in it? How do you organize systems around you to do it? Is it about power and money? What is it about? How do these things happen? And look at what happens as a result of that. How are lives affected as a result? So Really fascinating. Okay, and the third one, which is another heavy duty one. These weren't really fun. I should really change that billing on this podcast show episode. They weren't fun, but they were fascinating. The assassination of Gianni Versace was the third one that I watched, and it's a mini series. It's not just on the assassination of Gianni Versace. That's sort of like the catalytic point, but it's the stories of the people that come together around that incident. The backstory of the murderer and all the relationships that he had. Versace's execution or killing was the fifth murder that the perpetrator had committed in 3 months on a spree, if you like. So what happened? What was the build up to that? How did all these things come into place? And how does someone end up killing others and then themselves? And why Versace? What was that all about? Another thread through that was, how does homophobia feed into some of the drivers around the killer, some of the challenges that Versace faced and his family faced, and how all of these dynamics affected the families around all the players. Whew. Really fascinating stories about what we do to each other as humans, and how we can do better in terms of looking after one another, and how sometimes people are sick and don't end up on the right side of the tracks because of circumstances coupled with being sick. So, tough challenges. Okay, let's take a little break. I guess if I was going to sum up the themes from all these books that I've recommended and the shows that I looked at Netflix, it would be this, is stay curious and be open. When we stop our judgments in their tracks and we pause long enough to be curious about what's going on, to ask questions about what else might be happening, to be open to other people's stories, then we can't help but be more wise and compassionate. And if we are more wise and compassionate, we're definitely going to be better leaders. So keep reading, keep watching, keep listening, keep learning. I guess that's coming to the end of the solo-sode, and I guess what we've got coming up, I've got 43 unread books on my Kindle. I've tried to make a pact with myself not to buy any more books until I finish what was there. So I will be charging through them as quickly as I possibly can. If you don't have the Goodreads app and you're into books, then get onto Goodreads. It's an amazing source. And follow me and you'll get my notifications. I tend to write quick reviews of the books that I think warrant it. So like I said, I'm not going to review every single book on the podcast, but if you like books and you want to know what I'm reading and to pick up your next best read, follow me on Goodreads and you'll get all of my book reviews and stuff there. Coming up on the podcast next week, oh my goodness, this amazing conversation with John Davis. He is a fascinating fellow. Talk about somebody who had to change the story of his life. He was a stuntman for years in Hollywood and did some amazing things, had a major accident, had to reinvent himself. The power of the mind and focus. We had such a deep and rich conversation. I know you're going to love it, so make sure you tune in next week for that. And if you like this episode, if you like that episode, please share it. Like it, review it, share it on the socials. We have actually tripled our listenership in the last 6 months, and it's largely because people like you sharing our stuff and giving us a shout out on the socials. So I really appreciate you getting out the word. It takes a lot of effort to actually put a podcast together. Don't know if you know that. Not only do I have to sit on an uncomfortable Swiss ball, but I've got to think about this stuff deeply, and it gives me great joy to do so because I'm hoping that you will take something and do something with it as a result. And if you want to pay it forward, share it. That would be so awesome. Like I said, feel free to email me pictures of where you're listening from because that's always so fun to find out where my voice is ending up and where your ears are at the time. You can send it to zoe@zoerouth.com. You can send it through my Twitter @ZoeRouth or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn quite a lot. Okay, that's it from me this time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the book recommendations and the Netflix explorations. We'd love to hear your recommendations. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.